Ready when you are.
We're ready.
I'm Ed Morrissey. I'm here speaking with David Freddoso of the Washington Examiner. David is the author of several books, including The Case Against Barack Obama.
Yeah, just the one, The Case Against Barack Obama.
Several books.
The one so
There was
far.
Several books wrapped up into one book.
There's another coming soon, but another time.
Another time. David, you've done some great work looking into that. Right now you're looking into donations to Democrats, the Democratic Party. You've been kind of working on this for a bit, and I understand you got a column coming out tomorrow on this.
Well, yes. It's very interesting. If you remember back in September, Politico and Roll Call reported on a couple of meetings that were held on the Hill where Democratic members of Congress were very upset. Liberal groups were not kicking in the same kind of financial commitment that conservative third-party independent groups were kicking in on the Republican side.
Right.
And Nancy Pelosi was quoted in one of these articles as saying in this meeting, well, don't worry, I'm telling them to start upping the commitment, reassuring her members, saying, I'm telling them the time is now and they need to get going. If she's telling the truth, that's illegal coordination with independent campaigns. At the time, some people remarked on it, but now that the election's over, I thought, why don't we look back and have a look at what happened? Well, there's a point in mid-September where just all of a sudden the donations take off. Groups that had nothing, had $5,000 tops, all of a sudden raised $7 million over the next 30 days. Groups that hadn't even basically almost didn't exist prior to that date suddenly jumped to life. So was there something illegal about it? Well, I don't know. But as long as we're going to have these campaign finance investigations, I think that's one of the ones that ought to be looked at, because it was a pretty flagrant, well-reported, well-documented instance of someone saying, hi, I'm breaking the law, and then we sort of see, well, we don't know that there's causation, but there's certainly a interesting coincidental timing.
It's interesting because right now we've seen a lot of complaints from the left about the Koch brothers.
Yeah.
The Koch brothers are billionaire brothers, industrialists here in the United States. They support a lot of conservative causes, including Americans for Prosperity, and I've done work with Americans for Prosperity, just full disclosure, spoke at a couple of their conferences. And the gripe in this case was that there was secret coordination going on behind the scenes, that industrialists are funding are funding political efforts that are tied to the Republican Party and that sort of thing. How does this play out with that whole controversy over the Koch brothers and their participation in politics?
Well, the Koch brothers are they've given to a lot of the conservative groups in town, and to my knowledge, I've never in any way benefited from directly benefited from any of their money. I'm not. Maybe they gave some money to National Review. I once worked there. I don't know.
Right.
But,
yeah.
They're basically the rights answer to George Soros and these
or Peter Lewis of
and Peter Lewis, and there are
yeah.
several other liberal billionaires, and the same groups that are denouncing the Koch brothers are the ones that are taking all their money from Soros, who has and has openly said, yeah, sometimes there's a nice synergy between me making money personally and the causes I'm advocating. I mean, there was a time when he owned a large number of shares in a Brazilian oil company. Does that have anything to do with American oil being drilled or not being drilled? I mean, there's at least some small correlation there. There's some small connection between, but that's not really the main point. Just that they don't seem to like when you play by their rules, when you counteract their sources of funding. One of the things that these third-party conservative groups like American Crossroads and Crossroads GPS did in the 2010 election, they allowed the right to compete dollar for dollar against the labor unions, which between their in-kind and cash contributions are providing a massive advantage to Democrats in every election. I mean, we're talking about as much as, if you count everything, you're talking about as much as $400 million in each election cycle. And that's a lot of money that there's just never been an answer to. All of a sudden there is, and you have the President of the United States denouncing the Supreme Court with 6 members of it sitting directly in front of him in his 2010 State of the Union address.
Right.
I think they feel threatened. I think they feel like they're in the corner. Particularly with organized labor waning as a power. We saw the new Department of Labor numbers. Private sector unions are 6.9% of the workforce now. That's less than that's less than they have been. I don't even know when they started keeping the numbers, but in 1954 they were 59% of the, or 39% of the workforce.
Right,
I'm sorry,
right.
I'm getting my numbers confused. But that's really people view unions as irrelevant today. Labor laws have caught up with it. We're not in the Upton Sinclair, in the jungle anymore.
Or the West Virginia coal miners, for instance. There were legitimate reasons to have unions in a number of industries.
Unions are part of the free market.
Right.
Labor is supposed to be able to negotiate a price, and that's something conservatives shouldn't lose sight of. At the same time, that's just not the way the market's going. It's not moving in that direction. Workers aren't that interested.
Because workers have to pay a premium to be part of a union. They have to pay the dues.
Well, and they also might get stuck in a very risky pension plan. That's become a big part of many unions. On aggregate, as of 2006, before the stock market downturn, union multi-employer pension funds, at least, were on aggregate funded 66%, which means that today it's probably a lot worse than that. So that's not a selling point. Joining a union means you might not be able to contribute to your 401k. It means that it puts you in a much more complicated work situation where you can't discuss with your boss, hey, I want a raise. You may not be eligible for merit raises. It depends on your contract.
Right.
To see the Obama administration pursue a model that's going by the wayside in pushing for as much unionization as possible, which is what the NLRB and the National Mediation Board and the Department of Labor are working at tirelessly right now, is just it's basically just, hey, we're going to use the tools of government to help our friends. It's not really about improving the economy, because what's good for unions may or may not be good for America. You can have your opinion on which it is, but it's not. To see that as the government policy is just mind-boggling.
So, I don't want you to give away too much because your column comes out tomorrow, of course. But what's the thrust of what Democrats are doing with fundraising and coordination? And not so much in the last cycle, or
that's the one thing that we can't know for sure. What we can know is we can look at the numbers and we can say, well, this group all of a sudden, the day that Nancy Pelosi says this thing, suddenly raises a ton of money. So I don't know for sure what kind of coordination there is. All I know is you look at what happened and you look at where you have the FEC data and you have the speaker's public statement. You put the two together and you say, gee, this is kind of interesting.
Right.
What a huge coincidence that after September 16th, 2010, all of a sudden all of these liberal groups took off.
Well, the big fundraising issue on the Democratic side for this year is going to be Barack Obama's presidential campaign.
Right.
They've already announced that they're opening up the committee in March. David Axelrod has left the White House, presumably to go run the shop over there. What does that tell Republicans about what it's going to take to compete in the 2012 presidential cycle?
Well, I went back and looked at the numbers and I couldn't even believe it, because the last I had seen in 2008, Obama had spent, it looked like something like $600 million, and the numbers on Open Secrets actually say $754 million spent by Obama's campaign in the 2008
By the
election.
Campaign directly. This is not
by the campaign
not
directly.
Third parties on behalf
That's
of
exactly
Obama.
right.
Okay.
So that is just a lot of money. But I would also I would just say two things. First of all, obviously, yes, Republicans are going to need to raise a lot of money. They've done that in the past. It's not something that's impossible. At the same time, no amount of money can save you if you're really in trouble, and that's what the Republicans learned in 2006. There was no way to save that. As tied in as that old Republican majority was with K Street, and as able to raise money as it was, there was no way that a majority that was that arrogant and that out of touch could be saved. So,
it's a good point. It's a good thing to remember, and that's the good news, because he's going to raise a lot of money, of course, in this campaign cycle. We're speaking with David Freddoso of the Washington Examiner. I'm Ed Morrissey here for Hot Air and Town Hall, and we'll be back with more interviews later.
yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks for having me, man.
Oh, hold on. I got to free you from your...
You know what we probably should have talked about tomorrow's column, which hasn't finished yet, is yesterday, which was about